So comedy and rhythm, that's what we're going to take a look at. But the first thing that I have to kind of give you a heads up on is the fact that this very presentation may be the very most boring presentation you've ever heard regarding comedy. And I also want to clarify as well, because it is going to be all about comedic structure, which is near and dear to my heart. I have loved comedy my entire life, and how it works is something that's fascinating to me. Also, real quick, this is not going to be a conversation about comedic timing as well. I believe that that's a little more advanced topic, but sometimes when you see something in a program, I know that I've done it as well, as jump to a conclusion that, you know, it could be about trying to decipher what is comedic timing. Well, I equate comedic timing, just to give you a little backstory, is, you know what I'm talking about, right? An actor who is delivering a line on stage and knows how to pause perfectly to have the audience be able to recover from their laughter, to be able to hear the next line. Or Johnny Carson, an amazing television host, right, who was able to, at times, tell great jokes, and then there are times he told some stinkers, right? And then he was able to recover, usually with his own zinger that was even funnier than the initial joke to begin with. So that's what I'm talking about when it comes to comedic timing. And I also equate it to like a musical, if I may, analogy of a jazz drummer who's really fantastic, and he's a part of a quartet, and he's able to break out of that song and to do an improvisation, you know, well, we're going to be discussing what led up to that skill set, more along the lines of what did that drummer do years before with his little block. I mean, tap, 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 tap. Tap, tap, tap. So, what we're going to be discussing is a little more of the tap, tap, tap. In a comedic sense, for anybody who wants to master the art of comedy, as far as I'm concerned, you have to be able to answer the question, why did the chicken cross the road? Before you ever ask an audience, so, anybody from out of town? Now, I started my comedy learnings, if you will, many, many years ago when I'd taken over a morning show. I was the host of the morning show, and this particular show had 4 and sometimes even 5 people who were in the studio at the same time. And I was used to doing solo radio programs or even just co-hosted programs as well. And what happened is that I found is that every single one of us were naturally talented and naturally funny and had this amazing sense of humor. But what was happening during the show was we would top each other. If we read a news article and then somebody would say a zinger and then we would top, and eventually we missed the real joke 3-4 lines behind us. So it also became very difficult to listen to when you had all of those voices trying to top each other. So I recognized that early on and realized, as the host of the show, I needed to do something to help fix it. So my solution at the time was we needed more jokes. I know. All right. So I went to the library and I pulled out every joke book that I could find. And as I'm pulling them out, something caught my eye, and it was a book about the MASH television show, you know, one of the best comedies of all time. And because I love that show, and because I'm easily distracted, I put the books down that I was working on, and I picked up the MASH television show. Never realizing at the time that I picked up that book that I would learn so much about comedy from that moment forward that I still use to this day. And it started on the very first page of that book. And all it was a remembrance of the last season of MASH. But on the very first page, there were 2 photographs. The first photograph was the cast. You remember BJ and Hawkeye and Father Mulcahy. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, ask the old people next to you. Okay, now. But it was the cast waiting to shoot a scene. And they were standing around in a circle. And they were bent over double laughing. They were laughing their faces off. That was the picture on the top. The photo that was underneath it was completely different. A different scene, same set of cast. But they looked dejected. It looked like all of their pets had just run off. I mean, sad and depressing was this photo. The photo that had them laughing so hard, the caption that was underneath it stated, "This is the cast working out a death scene." The photo where they looked so sad, the caption read, "This is the cast working out a comedy bit." And I realized at that point how much effort needed to go into our planning and preparing and execution of comedy versus just focusing on the end result. So I immediately put down all of those joke books, and I started to grab and define comedians' biopics and anything that gave you insight into how they work and how they put things together. And I came up with, there's so many things that are out there, and there is no absolute when it comes to comedy. But I can share with you that, at least in my experience, I've been able to have 3 universal kind of comedic practices that have worked with me from the moment I picked up that MASH book to radio, to television, to even internet, everything in between. And the first one is the power of the number 3. Now, when we talk about rhythm, like we're doing tonight, one of the things I know that we can all recognize is how much we humans like even. We like even numbers. 24 hours in a day, the tide goes out, the tide comes back in 12 hours. We like music to have an even beat, an even pace. So it's something that's expected. It's even. What goes around comes around. So if you think about it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, that 3, that surprise, that element, that's what happens with comedy. It catches us off guard. It is against the grain of the even number that we humans like. Well, let me give you an example because it works for presentations as well as physical comedy. Classic Three Stooges move. Mo sticks out his hand, right? Says, "Look at that," to Curly. Curly then smacks it. Mo brings it around, smacks him on the head, right? Still makes me laugh, right? Anyway, it's 1, look at that. 2, he hits it. 3, bonks him on the head. That's where you're going to get your biggest laugh every single time, is by using and utilizing the power of 3. Whenever you arrange your stories, your jokes, your presentations. Also, take a look at the spoken word. Classic routine. Abbott and Costello. Who's on first? Who's on first? What's on second? I don't know who's on third base, right? And it goes on and on. And in fact, Abbott and Costello do an amazing job of being able to encapsulate that series of 3 over and over again so that punchline, even when it's in kind of parentheses of special bits, ends with a third base or something like that to give it the maximum punch. Now, another thing that we learn is, I know most of us, I believe, recognize the fact that we want the punchline to be at the end of our delivery. We want the most out of that input. And I believe that a lot of us think, you got to have a couple of jokes or something to set it up, to lead up to that point. And that is true. First and foremost, because we've learned the power of 3, and what we were able to apply on the morning show is that we started to whittle our jokes down to 3, and then we arranged them a little bit differently, which is we used the theory called BCA. So if A is your top joke, the one that you know is going to get you the biggest punchline, it's going to go last. But instead of starting with the weakest joke, start with the one that is a good, solid joke. Your B joke goes first, then C, then A. And that C joke in the middle, it's still a good joke. It just may be a giggler or or a tickler or a groaner or whatever you want to call it. And it gives the audience a chance to recover. So you start solid, you have a little dip, and then you go upwards with that great punchline. So that was the second thing we learned. And the third, notice the power of three, all right, is, and I have to tell you, I have a feeling you may start playing this game on the car ride home, all right? Because it's a lot of fun when you start thinking about it. It's called the jerk, the dork, and the deer. So, there's a dynamic that happens when it comes to characters. And by having, and I'm talking about character mold, who's the jerk, who's the dork, who's the deer? Oh, and by the way, I mean sweetheart deer, not deer, okay? But like, who's the sweetheart, D-E-A-R. And if you have that dynamic, you will have three people who never really fully agree, because if you have a show, a program, a broadcast, that everybody agrees, it's completely boring. But these are the three most typical that you will still see used today. Great example, The Hangover, the movie, not last Saturday. If you think about it, they used three core characters. They actually got rid of the main character. They're always in search of whoever that is. So in that movie, did anybody see it? By the way, yeah, okay, good. I'll talk to you then. Thank you, ma'am. I highly recommend it, by the way. Anyway, the idea is that one of the characters, Phil, right, was the jerk, the Bradley Cooper character. The dork, obviously, Zach Galifianakis, played Alan, the lone wolf with his Manny purse and everything else. And who did we root for? Well, Dr. Stu, the sweetheart's always getting picked on and not doing much about his life. But we, rooted for him to succeed. And you see that theme throughout, even in television. See, I told you it's fun. I'm just going to go off here in a second. Television show Friends, right? Think about it. I'm sorry, has everyone seen Friends? Thank you, Howard. All right, so even though there's twice as many characters, you had three guys and you had three girls, and you can make a plot out of any of that. So who was our jerk? Chandler. Who was our dork? Joey. Who was our deer? Ross. Let's go to the girls. Who would be our jerk? Monica, always bossy, clean freak. Who would be the dork? Phoebe. And then, of course, who was the sweetheart we were rooting for? That would be Rachel, okay? So they would do various plots with that. So what we were able to apply and learn from these three basic comedic principles, and again, I emphasize there's so many more, but these are the three that have been true to me for so many years, is that we were able to define our characters on the radio show. We got rid of all superfluous and we kept it down to three main characters, if you will. We had the jerk, the dork, the deer, delivering the jokes, only three punchlines, by the way, to keep it down, and delivering them in a BCA format. And that helped us to keep each one of us in check, and to also to help us know that if I delivered as the deer, because that's who I was, to be able, all right, on that show, I was a jerk in another one, but that's okay. But you also know how the other two are going to react, and that becomes interesting for your audience. And that's kind of, if I may, a very highbrow kind of approach to the rhythm, because it's the rhythm between people sharing ideas and bouncing a joke, and you start with the B, you say the C, and then I'm going to end with the A, that kind of rhythm. But I also have a feeling that we can prove that there's a literal rhythm to comedy. And I believe in that because that's why I've been using these musical kind of anecdotes and relationships throughout this presentation. I have brought along some finely tuned instruments that are going to be handed out to most of you at this point very quickly. And I want us to kind of think about our BCA, our story. What are we trying to tell as music? Literal music. You may guess what that is? That's our jerk, our dork, and our deer there. That one's a jerk. I don't know why. No. But anyway, I have a feeling that if we put these onto music, I have a very, very simple little song that I would like for all of you who are able to get one. I'm sorry I didn't have enough for everyone. Grab your finely tuned instrument. Remember, hum into the fat end. And we're going to play a very simple song. All right, so what we're going to do, I'm going to count in 3-3 time, of course, and I want to hear it from you, and we're going to prove my point. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3. All right, comedy have rhythm? Literally, I think so, because that sounded darn funny to me. I'm Dave James. Thank you.